Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to an opinion of mine. Because that's what this show is. I just express my opinion, and you either agree or you don't. It doesn't matter, because again, my opinion are just thoughts that don't affect policy. At best, maybe if you're listening to this, I affect your thinking on an issue. Um, but again, no one person's opinion is necessarily gonna uh, make or break the world. Okay, so I try to stay away from the hyperbole and the divisive nature of like sort of today's context, because that's what you see. You see a lot of division in today's world, and you know, I part of it is just because we've kind of been trained to sort of like to look at the political discourse, the social cultural discourse as a competition. It's either they win or we win. You know, you can't. There's no like thought process of, hey, we can find something that's sort of better, instead of saying, hey, let's work towards something better. Instead, it's like, okay, I get everything I want or I lose. Okay, and this drives a lot of different really poor social dynamics. I mean, part of this is just the way politics works, and this is what happens when you expect that electoral politics is the answer to everything. Whenever you think, hey, anytime there's a problem, it's the government's job to fix it, what happens is that you start really putting a lot of pressure on electoral politics as far as the consequence and sort of the weight that it has, which means basically electoral strategy ends up playing like becomes the way you look at the world, which means like, hey, I need 51%. I need 51% of the people who show up to vote, not the 51% of the people who show up to vote for what I think is the better option. So what I need to do is I need to discourage people from voting, because, or at least discourage people who won't vote my way to vote. And the way you do that is by basically making the people they would vote for seem horrible. Okay, because then it's like, okay, well, if the people I do agree with are horrible, then what's the point? Because I'm not going to go vote for the people I disagree with. And by getting your people angry enough who agree with you to vote, and the way you usually do that is by making the other side seem more horrible. Okay, so basically your job is just essentially becomes less about sort of talking about what's possible and the potential of society and where we can be and the great things we can do together, because at the end of the day, like, people like hearing that, but it's not necessarily. People are more quick to act out of fear. Okay, I mean, just imagine it. Like, hey, if I'm walking down on a sunny day and I see someone walking towards me, I'm not gonna rush to react. But if I think someone's like running at me with a hammer, out of fear, my body's going to react. It's sort of like a gut reaction without thinking. Okay, so fear is a much quicker way to move someone to action. Um, just when you think about sort of like, biologically how our body is wired, but that becomes but this creates very very bad outcomes when it comes to the way politics works. Again, this is what happens when we expect that politics is when we start looking to government as the answer, as policy as the answer to every problem we see in the world. Politics becomes more and more powerful in the way it controls how we interact in society, because it has that heavier weight. So then what happens is that basically the mission always is how to make the other side look as bad as possible. Not necessarily to talk about the value of your ideas or really kind of get, vet your own ideas. It's all about the other people suck, the other people suck. And the problem with that is that ends up creating like a trickle. Okay, so the idea is that every side is built up of a coalition. Okay, so then what happens is you try to toxify parts of that coalition. So you say, hey, like this group that's part of that coalition, they're extra horrible, and the fact that they even associates with them makes that whole group real bad. Okay, and you're seeing this sort of like really play out. You'll see like, when the left attacks the right, they're focusing on sort of like, more religious groups, or more sort of like older conservative types who generally have a lot of views that I just generally don't agree with. But basically saying, hey, these people hold these views, they're toxic, they're part of the coalition, your whole coalition sucks. Okay? And so on the sort of you get this response on the right where basically it's like, well, targeting particularly like transgender community, particularly the transgender community, to paint a broad brush of the entire coalition. And honestly, again, using pejoratives, and at the end of the day, like you see this hyperbole that like takes like cherry picks that either A, cherry picks people who don't represent the whole group, or two, take situations out of context to make the group look worse. And you see this again, you see this on both sides. I think it's particularly dangerous with the way it's being done with transgendered people because it's a much smaller, less um, a group with like less defenses because they are smaller and more disparate versus like um, you know a lot of the parts of the right coalition which are generally like larger groups that are more concentrated and sort of unified, so like they're more insulated to the kind of criticism, um, and isolated to the sort of like the social isolation that comes because you can have a town that's kind of religious, so people criticize religion, but like that town's not going to change, and the people in the town will still be in their community. But oftentimes, like if you're a transgendered person, there isn't like a giant transgendered community everywhere. There's maybe small little pockets, but for the most part, you have to operate around everybody else because there are so few. Um, so basically, there's very little place of sanctuary, especially when you think about like finding a job and all these things. Like you don't get there's not many places for refuge, so it's particularly bad when when this that group for the how that group has been targeted recently, and you are seeing that where like they'll take like sort of like maybe a few people who are maybe a little rough or say things that are a little extreme and act like, hey, that's what everyone says. Or two, take things that were said or done or events, take them out of context and make them seem much more horrible. And again, I'm not saying this isn't done on both sides. This is just the nature of politics. But again, it's being done for political reasons. It's really being done to kind of drive people to the polls, basically saying, hey, you know, if we paint this community really horribly, and we say, hey, this whole side of the aisle is defending this horribleness, well, the only way you can fight back is voting for us. Okay? Then I mean, it's not on both sides. Again, how oftentimes you've heard like, hey, if you don't defeat the Republicans, you're allowing, overt, a complete racist takeover of the country. Um, and in this case, you're hearing like saying, hey, if you let the Democrats win, you're allowing for a complete destruction of the social order, whatever that means. Um, you know, well, to me, I mean, on the topic of the social order, like to me, like the social order isn't built on everyone following any set of rules. It's having trust, and not trust in like every institution. It's like trust trust that every just general trust in individuals. Like general, like I don't live every day thinking everyone's out to get me. I live every day trusting that most people are out to just kind of live their lives. Not everyone, of course, not everyone. It's not going to be the case, but I would say like the vast majority of people are out living their lives, and knowing that there's certain boundaries that most people aren't going to cross. They're not going to like most people aren't going to rob me because they don't want me to rob them. Most people aren't going to hurt me because they don't want me to hurt them. Regardless of how they live their lives, regardless of what their hobbies are, regardless of X, Y, and Z. Okay, and we've kind of gotten away from that. We're just nowadays like just assuming that like people within certain groups are just like have like these weird motivations and that are just overtly malicious and whatnot in different ways because politics, the nature, the weight of politics has grown so much. So, point is, don't let politics prevent you from seeing the humanity in other people because at the end of the day, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, whether you like or dislike a particular group of people, they're humans. They're individuals that are complex. They have friends. They have family. Um, you know, now am I saying there's no one who's ever done anything that's beyond reproach? No, there's definitely some people who get to a point in their lives where they've kind of are difficult, if not impossible, to redeem. But it's very few, and there's going to be those bad apples in every group of every type. Because it has nothing to do with the way you live your life. It oftentimes has to do with just sort of or what group you're part in. It has to do with like a complex web of situations in your life where you know I generally you could take the most horrible person. Probably if you learn their life story, you could probably empathize with them to some extent. But at the end of the day, there is a point where you cross lines too much. Okay, um, and it basically becomes to a point where society can't can't trust you not to cross those lines going forward. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is most people just living their day-to-day life and doing and not crossing the lines of stealing or stealing or hurting or raping. These are just people who are just living their lives and being part of their communities. And yeah, well, it's just kind of discussing to see how we're all demonizing each other for being alive. Um, and really, what it comes down to is a lot of times hostility that's driven by political actors because their only desire is to accumulate power because they've convinced so many people that the only way to fix everything is through politics. Okay, and that's the biggest problem. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. My name is Alex Merced. Have a great day and enjoy.